The most challenging thing for students in studying history is moving from summarizing a topic to analyzing it.
One problem that students often have is knowing what analysis is, what explanation is, and how it differs from summary. A diligent student, inexperienced but diligent, can often summarize what happened. I tell students that's important. That's the first step. What happened? They can tell me. They can summarize a series or sequence of events. When we get to the question of explaining them, that's a little bit more difficult. Students can summarize a particular battle that took place in the Civil War. And then I'll ask them, why was this battle fought? Why was this war being fought? And they don't know. Or they can't say. And I have to tease out those meanings. I tell them to take a step back from the actual war itself and ask themselves, what did people disagree about enough to start shooting at each other? And they always come back to the obvious point, slavery. What was it about slavery that was so offensive to some and so essential to others that they were willing to leave a country and fight a war to defend it? When you start to ask those kinds of questions, and you can ask them about anything in addition to slavery, when you start to ask those kinds of questions, why were people doing these things? You're looking for an explanation. You're beginning to analyze causes. When you're listening to your professor lecture, when you're reading a book, pay attention especially to those kinds of comments from a lecturer or an author. This took place. Now I want to back up and say why this took place, why I think these things happened. When you come across those kinds of statements, either from someone who's lecturing or someone who's written a book or an article, those are the kinds of things to pay attention to. Very often, a professor will say, such and such happened, and I have 3 reasons to explain this. When I do this in class, students often stop me and say, what was that date again? And I tell them, I'll answer the question, but I'll tell them that's not the most important thing you should be listening for right now. The date is easy. What I'm trying to do is explain to you why that date is worth remembering. What caused these things around this date that you're so concerned with? You're concerned with memorizing the date, but you're missing the larger picture. So when someone says, I want to give you 3 reasons to explain why these things happened, that's what you pay attention to. Authors will do the same things in books. They'll tell you what happened, and then they may devote chapters to each cause. So look for statements of the reasons, the causes. Those are the key words to watch for. These factors contributed to this development. That's the kind of language you have to attune your eye and your ear to see and to hear, because that's when a professor or an author is telling you, I think these are the primary reasons, the primary causes for the events under examination.
Most students of history the first time, and I was like this too until I met some of the professors here, and they corrected me on it. I thought that I was just supposed to summarize. I thought that history was so old there was nothing else I could give to it, so they thought that I could not, there was no feeling I could put into it, or I'd be changing the facts. But they taught me you're supposed to have an argument. You look at what happened. Was it right? Was it wrong? Can you see how it may have affected something later on? So you cannot just summarize it. You have to pick a stance. Before you sit down and write that paper, you need to have a side. You can't come up with a side in the middle, because then you're already summarizing. You need to have a side, and your research needs to be centered around either proving that or maybe kind of correcting your thesis a little, but you need to have some kind of argument so you don't fall into that trap of just summarizing it. Because history, yes, this is what happened, but now you've got to pick, how did it happen? Why did it happen? What did it do to this thing, this event later and this person later? So there's always an argument. And if you pick that first, I don't think you fall into the trap of summarizing. You are allowed to have a voice in history. I don't think a lot of people know that.
I look at summary as a dead end. Summarizing to me, okay, Anne Boleyn was beheaded in 1536. That's it. You can't do anything more with that. You can't go anywhere with that. It's just person, date, what basically happened. I mean, there's really nowhere you can go from there. But if you want to say Anne Boleyn was beheaded in 1536 because she failed to give Henry VIII a son, okay, why did he need a son? What were the implications of him not having a son? Did he have wives before him who failed to give him a son? Obviously he did. You can look at that in a lot of different ways. Why? Why did he do this? Why was this so important? So if you find yourself, looking at a statement, an arbitrary way to differentiate is, there's usually a because or argues in the sentence, so that's how you're arguing something. But if you can't go anywhere with the statement, then you know that you're summarizing. It's just a basic statement of fact. There's nothing to argue. We know that she was killed in 1536 because we have the records to prove it. But if you're making an argument that she was killed because she failed to give him a son or because of her religious beliefs, you can do a lot with that. You can research that. You can find primary sources on that. You can find secondary sources that argue that point. I've never had a professor who just said, okay, just summarize these events. It's important. I mean, they'll say, okay, summarize, just like the date, the person, whatever, but then tell me why it's important that you know this. So I've never had a professor who just says, just summarize this. I mean, even when you're doing book reviews, yes, you're supposed to present a summary of what the book is talking about, but then you have to also present what the book is arguing. And then you argue why or not their argument is made well, or if it's not made well. Once again, you have to be aware of the, to be able to summarize the details, in terms of people, places, dates. But the most important thing is to tell why it's important or why that argument is valid or why it's not.